And welcome to OpenLine Online, Sunday morning, August 11th. And we have a lot to talk about. We have a smaller panel this morning. You know how it gets with the summer. And we have a few folks out. But before I mention the folks out, I'm going to mention the folks that are in. So let's introduce the panel here first. First person, our good sister Jennifer Jones Austin is joining us from the on-air program this morning. Good morning, Sister Jennifer.
You all know I always like being with you.
Oh, thank you.
And Derek Jeter.
Ooh,
It's an inside joke, family.
inside joke. Inside joke.
Just joking. I'm joking, outfielder.
There you
Get
go.
her to tell the story.
We have the one half of the history brother Achille Buchanan.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, family.
We have, and I always say this, and I say this, with honor when I call and say brother protest, because right now we tell people to be active and do something if you don't like the way things are being done. And this brother has been consistent with protesting things that you don't like, and also being out there uplifting and honoring the things that we need to know about. And that is our good brother. And I have to call you an elder, my brother. Elder in the sense of, not in the sense of age, but in the sense of in a wise man there, my brother. There you go. Brother Larry Ham. Good morning, my brother.
Good morning. It's
Good
good
morning.
to be
You could
here
write
this
that
morning.
check out to Fatima.
Yeah, I
Muhammad there.
sure will. Can't get a good introduction like that.
Off camera, we were talking about Social Security, so yes, we are both elders.
That's right.
Yep. And
Are
bringing
you
it,
eligible?
Yes.
and bringing up the rear, sitting over there, is
I'm not
Frederick
too far
Douglass. No, we got that inside. Frederick
Douglass.
The one and only, because some people get upset when I joke with Bob Pickett. Don't joke with Bob Pickett, Fatina, blah, blah, blah. He's being disrespectful. No, we go way, way back. So there you go. Attorney, former judge, Bob Pickett. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And off today is Nitha Khan and our sports brothers, Jamie Harris and Bobby Childs. There you go. I wonder what they, well, they ain't at the Mets game, but we'll get into that a little later today. A lot of things in the news here. And the first thing I think I'll start off with is the whole thing of surrounding the death, suicide death, potential
Question
killing,
mark.
yes, of Jeffrey Epstein.
Everybody's putting quotes around that.
Exactly. Jeffrey Epstein was found yesterday morning here in a federal facility in New York City around 6:30 a.m. Dead, basically, in his cell, in his jail cell. Jeffrey Epstein was back on July 23rd. He was on suicide watch. He was seeing a psychiatrist daily, and he was taken off of the suicide watch on July 29th. And the reason why he was put on suicide watch is because he was found unconscious in his jail cell with marks around his neck. And it was said that he had a cellmate, and they said that the cellmate revived him, because some people said that maybe the cellmate tried to kill him, but we got word that the cellmate helped revive him. So we don't know if he had a cellmate this time, but the question is, and you spoke about this, Jennifer, and I'm going to throw it to you, is, and you work with the facilities here in New York, if someone is put on suicide watch, is it logical to take them off this quick?
So the interesting thing here is that Fatine references that I work with the jails here in New York City. I serve on the New York City Board of Correction, and we regularly receive notices about people committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide. Suicide is actually the greatest cause of death in jails and prisons across the nation. And there are many people who are on suicide watch when they are in jails. Someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who was facing the charges he was facing and the mounting evidence growing, and then couple that with him having attempted suicide, it defies logic that a psychiatrist would assess him on a daily basis for just 6 days and then determine to take him off of suicide watch, especially when the court just unsealed documents that were more damning against him this past Friday. That psychiatrist would have had knowledge of what was happening. And to take him, like voluntarily
Right.
off of suicide watch, something's not right there. And so I firmly believe that, as we begin to unpack this and figure out what exactly happened there, first thing we need to do is to take a look at that psychiatrist and his or her background, what went into that decision making, how they came to that, how they rendered that opinion. And I'm just gonna put it out there, maybe we need to take a look at that person's bank account or something.
Well,
Makes no sense.
there's an expression that dead men tell no tales.
Correct.
So I think the decision of taking him off suicide watch may have very well have been beyond that psychiatrist's pay grade. And so there's supposed to be an investigation. I don't know about you, but I don't think anything substantive or revealing is going to come out of any investigation. I think there was a nationwide bipartisan sigh of relief when people found out that he died.
That's correct.
He had friends on both sides of the political fence, very wealthy men. A number of people have been already named, a number of politicians being associated with him in relationship to various women, from Dershowitz to Bill Richardson, former Democratic governor of New Mexico, the Clintons, the Trumps. I mean, it's a hot mess, and I doubt if we're going to know anything about what really happened.
Well, I don't know what would come out of an investigation, but there needs to be one. Anyway, he died in a federal institution, so I'm calling on the congressman from New York City to call for a congressional investigation. Somebody should be fired. All weekend we were hearing about how outraged Barr was.
Right.
If he's so damn outraged, somebody need to be fired.
Right.
Somebody need. How is someone who was on suicide watch one week going to be dead the next week from suicide unless somebody fell asleep at the wheel? So there needs to be a federal investigation, both in the Senate and in the Congress. The appropriate committees need to call investigate for the very reasons that Akili just said. How high level a criminal this was, and because all of these very powerful people in high places were investigated. This can't be another example of the justice system functioning one way for the rich and another way for the rest of us. Now, the criminal proceeding against Epstein may be over, but there are persons associated with Epstein for whom criminal proceedings can proceed. And in addition to that, the civil proceedings are going to go on anyway. And there are at least 24 women being represented in this situation. So it's a very, it stinks. And everybody knows it stinks. And we could hear that from the calls that people had this morning on the radio side of the program.
Bob Pickett, your thoughts?
No, I concur with everything that has been said. His death raises a lot of questions, and that to the extent that the government knew there was a suicide warning set out here, it should have kept in contact with him and made sure that he was safe. It raises a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
Barr is on the hot seat with this, and Acosta is on the hot seat. consider Acosta, the former Secretary of Labor, who had to resign amid the public outcry over the sweetheart deal that he gave Epstein in Florida. He was the prosecuting attorney in Florida at that time when Epstein was given like an 18-month sentence for something he should have received no less than 15 years for, an 18-month sentence that allowed him to go to work during the day and come back to jail at night,
And make
nobody
lots of
even
money.
right and make money, and nobody even knew he was in jail. That's how he came home at night. So Acosta was the prosecuting attorney. He's appointed by Trump as Secretary of Labor. It blows up about the sweetheart deal. Acosta has to resign. Barr, it becomes head of the Justice Department. You know, so you got both of Trump's key people all up in this now. Acosta, the former Secretary of Labor, and Barr, the head of the Justice Department that Trump said, that's my guy. You know, because that's the one who fixed the whole Mueller investigation.
Let's talk about.
May I
Let me
make-
just.
let me make a suggestion.
I just want to put in there real quick, is about conspiracies. And one of the things that was very interesting this morning is that we received a lot of calls about conspiracies. And if we look at this government, you know, I would be amiss if I don't bring up Gil Noble's name. Like it is, that how he exposed certain things with CIA agents, former CIA agents, former FBI agents, people working for the government. If you go back and look at certain black revolutionaries that were killed, if you go back and look at the situation where you had Congresswoman Maxine Waters with Gary Webb, I believe he was a journalist, that helped expose the whole thing with the
Around Contra and
Contra
drugs.
situation.
Yes.
We had him on OpenLine. He was found dead. You look at the powerful government. You look at the situation with Ron Brown, died in an airplane crash. Could have been our first African American president. I don't know what was happening surrounding that. But if you start to take a look at this, then you also look at how things are done in, I hate to bring it up, Russia. You know, when people go against the government, they are found, some of those folks are found dead. So, exactly. So when you talk about connecting the dots, and we got that quote from you, Bob Pickett, years back on OpenLine, connect the dots here, connect the dots, that this is not far-fetched, that this is something that is up in the government, and if it's not the government, it is with some powerful people that can make things happen and make things go away. Brother Achille.
Let me suggest, based on what you just said, that nothing our family out there, they have a role, and what's that role? You need to go out and vote. Make sure you vote for progressive candidates, because given the nature of this particular death and the whole issue of conspiracies, regardless of administrations, whether it's Democrat or Republican, we're talking about very, very powerful people who could have you disappear because they have the wherewithal to do it.
That's right.
I'm suggesting that the brothers and sisters out there will vote for progressive candidates, because otherwise, under a Trump administration or any other questionable administration, Republican or Democrat, nothing is really going to become exposed.
That's right.
and
If
I
the
wanna-
mob can do a hit, if Jimmy Hoffa body hasn't still been found, these things, that's why I connect the dots out here, because these things are real.
I want to ask the question, how does a man who was found with massive cardiac arrest commit suicide? Because Epstein, it's reported
Right.
that Epstein was found, he had a massive cardiac arrest. How do you suicide yourself into a massive cardiac arrest? Now, I don't want
Unless the
to,
suicide went bad.
right. I don't want to, generate it, but there's just,
Suicide
the
go
whole
bad when
thing
you survive.
stinks. It stinks to high heaven, and there should be an investigation. And even if they don't investigate it, it's not going to go away. because criminal proceedings can be brought against other people, ancillary actors in this case, and the civil cases are going to proceed.
The civil cases will proceed, but I concur. I agree that criminal investigations need to continue, but they only will continue, and if progressive Democrats, a progressive administration is put in place. Otherwise, those investigations will be suppressed and quashed.
Yeah, I just want to say something. It's amazing. Nat Turner, and agree or disagree, we appreciate your support. He says, I don't, care about Jeffrey Epstein. And there's a lot of people that don't care about Jeffrey Epstein.
It's not about Epstein.
It's
at
not
this
about
point.
him
It's
because
not about him. It's
it
about
was it was Epstein
the
yesterday.
criminality.
It was Sandra Bland last year, when it happened to her. So this is what I'm saying. And since Sandra Bland, there's been more people of color found in jails dead, and it's swept under the rug. So it's not about the person; it's about the situation.
Right, and I think that, I appreciate what Nat Turner is saying, but I think we also have to appreciate that the reason this is of real concern is not about Epstein, it's about what Epstein did.
Right.
What he knows.
Right.
Yes.
What he knows.
Let's begin with what he did and what others did to young girls.
There you
That's
go.
where we begin.
There you go.
This is about, this is going in and out. This is, it's about, Jeffrey Epstein engaging in pedophilia and working with other people to give them access to young girls. That is
And sexual slavery.
right. Human trafficking, sexual slavery. And so that's why we're first and foremost concerned. And then we get into the cover up and how affluence in this nation allows you to get away with things. Thank you. Thank you.
And so that's the whole situation there. It's about the situation. It's about what the people get away with out here. And if this continues, then they can silence, as you just mentioned, Achille, going out there and voting for progressive candidates. So what happens, you mentioned on the show, conspiracies against those that they are silencing those voices. If people in powerful positions can dictate this, then the people that your everyday average person, we'll be held hostage.
Right.
We will be held hostage out here. So that's the whole thing about Epstein. We're not here taking his side, because I just think that and it started to show this week where certain things was leaked, that he was giving women to certain powerful people, to governors and things like that. What more was getting ready to drop?
Right. So he had to be taken down. He had to.
Jennifer had mentioned the documents that were released. The volume of documents was overwhelming. 2,000 pages of documents were released in the Epstein case. And it has been reported that the contents on those pages were explosive. So what a coincidence, as the lawyer from one of the groups that are bringing suits said, what a coincidence that he should commit suicide the following week after the 2,000 pages of damning evidence were released.
Right.
This is textbook stuff. This is like Hollywood murder she wrote stuff.
Yeah.
And the reality is, this has been going on for a long time at that high revenue level, where crimes are committed, but they go away quickly.
Right. Well, we'll move on from this. There's a lot of other things happening out here. Just want to mention, this past Friday was the 5th anniversary of black teen Michael Brown being killed in Ferguson, Missouri. Again, another person of color shot by the police. No justice for the family. This weekend, Michael Brown Sr., call for the reopening of the investigation into the police officer Wilson that shot and killed Michael Brown. I don't know how far that will go, but I'm glad that there is an exhibit that has been open this weekend and moving forward for Michael Brown, because his life and how he died should not be something that's in vain. It should be something that people can hopefully learn from.
Absolutely.
You know, but I'm just tired of just seeing our people of color being abused, and I'm also tired of seeing, and I always talk about when we mix these apples with oranges. I'm also tired of seeing, turning on the news and seeing in our community people that look like us or and are innocent bystanders killed by violence in our community. And we keep saying it gotta stop, it gotta stop. It's become a cliche. You know, are people gonna stop, or are people gonna be less violent? I throw that out to the panel here. Where are we at with this within our communities?
Well, you raised two issues. One is police terror,
Yes.
which I think is aptly, it is police terrorism as far as I'm concerned, which we cannot divorce from the question of domestic terrorism, white supremacy in
That's
this
right.
country. I mean, we know the history of police enforcement in this country began with slave catching.
Right.
Hundreds of years ago. I mean, that's the genesis of much of police enforcement in this country. And with white supremacist notions of dominance of African Americans as the other, as subhuman, as savage, as brutes, it's very easy to dehumanize us. And that's why you have seen consistently through American history the killing, the murder with impunity by people in power of black men, women, and children. So that's one issue. But the other issue that you raised, which I think is as important, Fatim, is the question of black on black violence.
Yes.
Why do we hate ourselves so much that we diminish the life, the importance of a black life if you yourself are black? Why is life so unimportant to us? What is that about? And we haven't spent enough time and resources and intellectual energy discussing that issue of self-loathing. Why have we imbued ourselves with our own self-hatred and loathing?
There was a documentary produced several years ago titled "The House I Live In," and the documentary examined the life experience of African American people, that have been challenged by this nation since the beginning of slavery, through Reconstruction, through the Jim Crow laws, through the war on poverty. The war on drugs, not the war on poverty, the war on drugs. And what they did was they went in and they talked with a lot of persons who've been incarcerated, as well as people living in poverty, in communities beset and bereft with poverty. And what they what they found was that people talked a lot about, essentially, like they spoke with hopelessness and a sense of this is what it is. And so this devaluing of life kind of begins with, there is no real future for me. This will never change. This has been my grandmother's lot in life. This has been my mother and father's lot in life. This will be mine. So shall it be my children's, because this is just our American life experience. So, I may be dead by 25 anyway. And if I'm not, then I'm going to be poor and struggling. So life, the promise of a real opportunity is not at hand. So I think less about whether or not I'm going to take your life or I'm going to take my own.
There was something I just wanted
This
to
is
put
an
out there.
interesting piece.
There was a movie I saw, and there was a line in this movie that caught my attention. Jamie Foxx was the actor. The movie was about Stanley Tukey Williams. He was the origin of, he created the
Talking about
Crips.
the Bastards of the Party. That movie.
I don't know if that was the name of the movie,
Bastards of the Party was about the rise of both the Black Panther Party and
No,
US organization,
no.
and how that then, when those organizations were destroyed by the police in California, what you saw was a rise of a younger generation, but it manifests as the Crips and Bloods.
Right.
It was a very good
Right,
documentary.
and it is.
And the OGs of each of those organizations came out and called for the end of black-on-black violence, gang violence.
And it's interesting. One of the things that I give him Tume credit for this, but let me get to this point here. Oh, well, I give him Tume credit from the perspective of reaching out on the East Coast, and we brought in some Blood and Crips. We brought in some OGs, some older Bloods and Crips that came together and was working together and trying to reach the younger set that was in the street, especially in Newark, and reaching with the people on the ground, the community activists, of stopping the bloodshed and what was going on in the community. But the point in the movie I was bringing up about Stanley Tukey Williams, and he was executed. And he changed his life in prison. He had written some children's books, and a lot of folks said that he turned his life around and they were trying to stop his execution. But in this movie that Jamie Foxx played Stanley Tukey Williams, there was a scene where Tukey Williams was standing in front of the mirror, or he was asked, why do you kill those that look like you? Why do you kill those that look like you? And his response was, and it was very interesting to me, he said, it's like when I look in the mirror, I don't like what I see in that mirror, and I see myself. And since I see myself, and in myself I see my other brothers and sisters, and I don't like what I see, I want to eradicate what I see. And when I heard that line, I said, whoa. Self-hate is that powerful that you don't care about your own. We've seen...
Well, just think of the flip side of that. White supremacy and white skin privilege is just as powerful in making white people believe that their white skin is more important than anything else. Among the joke that Chris Rock gave some time ago, if a white person had a choice of being him, Chris Rock, that white person would say, nah, I'm gonna stick with this white thing for a while. And Chris Rock is rich. So white supremacist notions of superiority and black inferiority are as powerful as the self-hatred, which is a part of that process.
Yeah, well, you know what this is reminding me of, and I don't want to take us off topic, but it does remind me of Toni Morrison. And,
I was going to her anyway.
But Toni Morrison's book, The Bluest Eye, right? Essentially where she exposes, how black girls, little black girls, came to self-loathe, right? Because we were told that these little white dolls were the image of beauty in America, and to be white and have blue eyes was the penultimate. That was it. And so if you were dark complexioned with dark eyes, then you couldn't be farther from the American or the societal definition of beauty. So you begin to loathe yourself because you can't be that. In her documentary about her life, which is actually out right now, titled "The Pieces I Am," she talks about how, how our children, our boys and girls, have been led to believe by society that we are less than, and how the problem of racism is not just a black problem. Speaking to what you're talking about,
it's not a black problem; it's a white problem.
It's a white problem, and that if the white person has to believe that they are superior Because when they appreciate that they really are not, what do they really have?
Right,
Right?
exactly.
It's like, they've got to believe. I think I'm going to misquote this, but paraphrasing her, she talks about if to be tall, you have to keep somebody else on their knees.
Right.
Right? And so that's what white privilege is all about. I have got to feed this beast
Right.
that tells me that I am better, because the moment that I appreciate that I really understand I'm not, then I'm lost.
Right. If we want to stop,
let's just say, I'm going to come back to you, but I just want to take a minute, because we talk about Donald Trump, we talk about these politicians. I just want to take a quick minute to uplift our sister that became an ancestor, Toni Morrison.
Yes.
I just want to just say this, and Jennifer, go into it, and you brothers can add. Toni Morrison, this past Monday, died at the age of 88. She was the first African-American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, a Pulitzer Prize,
a Nobel Prize winner.
Exactly. Presidential Medal of Freedom given by President Obama. She was the author of 11 novels. Those novels are listed as The Bluest Eye, Sulla, Songs of Solomon, Tar Baby, Beloved, Jazz, Paradise, Love, A Mercy, Home, God Help the Child. And you talk about, you went to Washington, and you talk about Toni Morrison on social media. Just update us on that.
So real quickly, and I just alluded to it just a few minutes ago, Toni Morrison, there was a documentary done of her life titled The Pieces I Am, and it was first screened in theaters back on June 25th. Well, it's actually moving around the country, and there are limited screenings all around the country. It's here in New York at the Film Institute at Lincoln Center, and in Williamsburg, and in other parts around the country. Well, just so happened that I was going to be in D.C. and I had a little downtime, and so I looked up the film to see if it was airing the day after she passed away, and I got to see it. I highly recommend it for everyone. What I found when I went to the theater, both in D.C. and then I came back to New York and took my children, 17 and 21, and my husband and my mother to see it, is that there are more white people in the theater watching this documentary than there are African Americans, but we need to be in there to see it. Toni Morrison tells the story, The Pieces I Am, with others, noted persons like Walter Mosley, a writer, Paula Giddings, an author of Black history, Sonia Sanchez, a poet, right? They tell the story of how her work helped people to understand the Black experience. And what I love most about Toni Morrison is, as she talks about her work in the documentary, she says, I didn't write for white people. It's good if they read it. She said, but if you listen to how people have talked about being Black in America, and she even, references Frederick Douglass. She says, if you listen to what he said and what he wrote, you appreciate he really wasn't writing for Black people, because he was so busy explaining the Black experience, which lets you know he was trying to help white people understand. She said, I don't write for white people.
Well, she was making a historical commentary about what was needed at one point in history and what was needed now. That's one thing. So I'm sure she wasn't denigrating Frederick Douglass.
No.
She wasn't, she was, and
No.
essentially to your point, what she was saying is he was trying to influence them.
Right.
But she was saying that what she was seeking to do with all of her work is to stop acting as though Black people don't exist outside of the white man's world and the white gaze.
Exactly.
Right? Let's stop pretending that that my life is completely dependent upon what white people think of me or how white people view me.
And that was a major criticism by white folk
Of her
work.
Right.
And she rigorously and steadfastly challenged that notion. I have absolutely no responsibility to have to write for you or include you in my work. And she defended that. I suggest everyone, other than looking at the documentary, to go on YouTube and see a number of her interviews,
Oh, yes.
particularly with Charlie Rose, because he brought forth and challenged her on that issue. And she brilliantly raises the question.
That's right.
And pushes back to Charlie. She says, I don't have to do that. If you suggest that I have to write for white people, that I have to write stories for white people, what are you saying? That, and I don't want to paraphrase what she's saying. Please look at her interviews. She puts Charlie and that whole question of the white gaze in its proper place.
Indeed.
Can we get the interview online?
Oh,
Yes.
you can,
Yeah,
yes.
that's it.
Yes.
You can look at it.
I wanted to share that with the
Yeah,
audience.
he
make
just
sure
said to
that-
go out there on YouTube.
On
to make
YouTube,
sure that
please.
they understand that it is online.
But she's a powerful force. And let me just quickly say, what I didn't, I'm going to just show my ignorance. I didn't know she was an editor
Yeah, for Random House. For
for
years.
Random House,
Yeah.
which she held herself out as doing first, and then teaching, and ultimately came to a point of embracing herself as a writer, and as an author. But most people only know her through her books.
Yeah, and it's through Toni Morrison that a number of very prominent black artists, black writers, came into their own because of her position at Random House,
Right.
identifying
go to-
black talent.
I want to go to Larry. Larry, they just gave me the name of that movie, the movie about Stanley Tukey Williams.
Yeah.
It's called Redemption.
Right.
Redemption. So that's there. I want to thank those that Anthony Long and there was someone else, Edward Latson, just to name a few that brought that out here. But I had cut you off twice, and I apologize for making this point. But I just wanted to uplift Toni Morrison because we have to own our own. If we don't own our own, we're gonna wait for and celebrate. Because then we're waiting for others to do that. No,
Yeah.
go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, Toni Morrison will live on forever through her work. And she's left a volume, an expanse of work, and people should read that work, and they will continue to be inspired by her. On the issue of gun violence, if we're serious about gun violence, we have to stop the flow of illegal weapons into black communities. The increase in gun violence is commensurate with the increase of the importation of illegal weapons into our communities. I mean, you could put it on a graph. If you went back to 1966 when there were only 100,000 black men in federal prisons, when our prison population was commensurate with our population in the general society, roughly 10 to 13%, when you begin to see three things: the increase of the flow of drugs into our community, the increase of drugs, and the implementation of the Rockefeller-type drug laws that started in New York and then were replicated in states across the country. You could literally see on a graph the increase in crime from 100,000 in federal prisons to 1.2 million where it is today. So number one, we have to appropriate more money for drug interdiction. Instead of spending trillions on wars in Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan, where we have been 19 years longer than any other war in the history of the country, we should be spending that money at home on things like drug interdiction and illegal weapons interdiction. In New Jersey, everybody knows where the illegal drugs come from. You could literally set up a stop on 95 and stop people and collect guns. They know where the guns are coming from. They're coming out of Pennsylvania. They're coming out of states in the South into New Jersey, and it's a similar story in other states. So, and the other thing is, black people do not have a greater predilection toward murder than other people. White people kill white people, and they kill them in numbers as large as the numbers for black people. In fact, their numbers are larger than our numbers. It's just that our situation is disproportionate in
Right.
terms of our size of the population. But everybody kill. And one thing we know about crime,
Larry, let's also say it also feeds the narrative.
right, it also feeds the white supremacy, white racist narrative. So that's number one in terms of dealing with the drug issue. On the anniversary of the death of Michael Brown, what is the big story 5 years later after the death of Michael Brown? The big story is that the police have killed 5,000 people since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson.
5,000?
5,000 people.
That's an average of 1,000 a year
1,000
since
a
Michael
year.
Brown.
The police, on average, in the United States,
Wow.
kill 1,000 a year. In 1 year, our police kill more than the police in Great Britain killed in the entire 20th century. That's something to really consider.
That's incredible.
And I just want to mention real quick, today, in lieu of the anniversary of Michael Brown, in lieu of the anniversary of Eric Garner, there's going to be a major march. The Enough is Enough march is today. Sister Tamika Mallory and Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network, everybody's coming together. They're going to gather at 3 o'clock at the Adam Powell, I believe it's 3 o'clock, at the Adam Powell Junior State Office Building to march for justice for Eric Garner.
This is in Harlem today,
Harlem
125th Street.
That's right, to demand justice for victims. And yesterday, we were marching, People's Organization for Progress, we were in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where a family was grieving over the death of a loved one, and the police in Fort Lee came into the house and beat up the family. You know, they in there grieving about the death of someone in the house, and the police came in. So we marched yesterday from Borough Hall in Fort Lee to the community center. So the struggle against police brutality not only continues, but goes on unabated. I mean, how many deaths have there been since Michael Brown that we could talk about?
You know, one of the things that always struck me, and this is just a little something, but it's one of those things that you just wonder, is it coincidence or is there like a message in this? I remember when Michael Brown was killed, and you know, and how Ferguson erupted, appropriately so, and I couldn't help but think of the fact, and this is the lawyer in me. You with me, Bob Pickett? Plessy v. Ferguson. Brown versus Board of Education.
Yep.
And it was kind of like, is there some link and some telling there? Is there something that we're supposed to take away from that, right? That those, I mean, Ferguson and Brown, linked in the way that Ferguson and Brown were linked in America in connection,
You
Right?
saying some words.
You
You
see
getting
what
too
I'm
deep.
saying?
You getting too deep.
right?
You
Or
getting
even go
cosmic
one step
now.
further, Trayvon Martin, Martin Luther King Jr. This, like, I couldn't help but think, were we to be reminded,
Wow.
Trayvon Martin,
Wow.
Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown, were we to be reminded of what has been this nation's
History.
history concerning African Americans
Wow.
and the progress that was to come? You know, kind of like we developed some tools.
That's no coincidence.
There's just something there.
It's interesting.
I-
Yes.
I don't know.
What it
I'm just
is.
talking.
that's
Maybe I
what
sound
it
a
is,
little-
but it's serious.
I don't know. Too
It is.
cosmic.
It's serious.
Too cosmic.
You know,
Think on it.
I want to.
Okay.
You know,
I'm just saying.
it's times when I break up these stories here, but I'm curious about something, and I'll do the story first. There was some discussion from our President Trump.
He's your president. He's
All
not
right,
mine. I'm not
I
normalizing
got
that.
you.
No.
I got you.
Be careful
I
with
got
your
you. I know. It hurts me to say it, you know, but serious discussion. They say serious discussion taking place, dealing with the background checks and these mass shootings. And of course, we don't want these mass shootings. And majority of these domestic violent crimes are done by white folks, and white folks get killed, black folks get killed. The question is the president blowing smoke? That's number one.
Yes, he's blowing smoke.
Blowing smoke. Number two, where do we have this conversation in the proper context of dealing with it on the national level of background checks
Well,
or these mass shootings and then black on black
Okay.
crime
Those
and
are
shootings
three-
in
those
the
are
community?
sep-
How do we
I
have
hear
that
you.
conversation
I
in the
hear
proper
you.
context?
Well, let's be clear. If you're talking about proper context,
Yes.
the context is, as I said last week, America is at war with itself on various levels. When it comes to white people and violence with blacks, black people are being killed with impunity. There's a war against what white folks fear about this nation becoming too black, too brown. It's as simple as that. There is, in the minds of white racists, there's a race war going on, and they are the perpetrators of it. It's as simple as that,
But are
as far as
black
I'm
and brown-
concerned.
are black
All
and-
right, that's a
But are black
separate-
and brown folks? Because I agree with what you say. Are they
Finish your
coming
que-
together? Because
finish your question. Let me
Okay, go
respond
ahead,
to the
go-
question.
okay.
You said no. I said finish your question.
Finish.
But are
black folks and brown folks coming together? Because right now with this immigration
they?
piece,
Are
it
they?
seems like when it's black folks, we deal with it separately. I'm not saying that we don't have some brown folks that are with us, but then now we're looking at the immigration piece, and there's a lot of black folks that are not with that. Are we coming together, or should we come together? I say yes, but should we come together? Because if we come together, we can really deal with this in a properly and better as a group versus separated as a group.
There's a political question here dealing with racial discrimination and racial terrorism in this country, right? There is terrorism going on perpetrated by whites and being obfuscated by issues of mental illness. When it comes to Trump, it's a mental illness. No.
Correct.
There are white people who are committing acts of political and racial terror. Period. Now, are we, as black people and brown people, are we part of that when we kill ourselves? Yes. Why? Our own self-loathing and our self-hatred, right? That's a separate issue because it takes on more of a psychological question, but it's just as important to deal with. How are we going to fight against, on a moral question, how are we going to take the moral high ground on questions of violence and white terror against us if we're killing ourselves?
Well, I guess it's interesting when you put it like that, and I appreciate all that you said. At the core, it's all mental illness, right? When you begin with mental, when you say being at war with itself, what I'm saying is at the core, anybody who wants to take out other people, whether it's based on white supremacist views, domestic terrorism, right? Whether it's based on a feeling of hopelessness, there's a core. Like disconnecting something's not working, or you don't value life. You don't value life, right? So it's a human condition.
Yes,
that's
it's a
what
human
I'm saying to you.
And violence is a human condition.
Right.
That's true. That's true. And it's a question of power. Why do some people feel the need to kill other people? I mean, nations. Why is there war? Why is that? So I mean, those are very good, philosophical questions that we can get into, and
Yeah. Nat Turner says that I irritate him by calling him our president. And I'm not going to sit here and defend Donald Trump because I've marched on Donald Trump and this, that, and the other. But he is the president of the United States. You want to make a difference, then make a difference. That's all to it.
Vote against
make a
him.
difference. That's all to it. And he occupies the White House. He is what he is. He is the president of the United States. I don't enjoy saying it, but that's what he is.
So let me just give you a little commentary on this past week when I went down to D.C. I also toured the National Portrait Gallery and saw for the first time the portrait of President Obama and of First Lady Michelle Obama. Now, I don't know, have any of you ever been to the National Portrait Gallery? It was my first time. So
Yeah,
it was
I've seen the
right.
portraits, yeah.
So it was my first time, and they have the gallery of presidents, and they have a painting of every president, 1 through 44. George Washington had several, I guess, is the founding, but as you move through, you'll have, at most, usually, I mean, on average, just one for each president, and a couple will have 2 or 3. What was fascinating was as I went through, the portraits are varying sizes. Most are kind of life size. President Obama's is larger than life. JFK's is larger than life. Bill Clinton's is larger than life. Richard Nixon, is in a little box. It's about this big. And I was with my mother, and we both, opined that perhaps that was because he was impeached. So he doesn't merit the level of respect by way of size afforded the others. And all we could think is we hope that at some point they'll create a little snapshot when they have to put President Trump up in there.
pixel.
A little pixel, right?
Right. I want to just say, Anthony Long states, please read the book Black on Black Violence by Dr. Amos Wilson. Rest in peace. I agree. Dr. Amos Wilson was a frequent speaker at the United African Movement when I was a member of the United African Movement. And you're right. That was a deep brother, and he dropped a lot of jewels. And see, when they leave these books, that's why I say, you want to know about Dr. King? Read Dr. King, and then you'll realize who the real Dr. King was. What they portray of Dr. King is not the real Dr. King. He's not that. And you'll see that him and Malcolm were...
Oh, he was revolutionary.
Exactly. They just, you got to read them and to understand them. I wanted to say to you, Jennifer, as we continue on, the Portrait Museum, do you think it's something that we can capture if we did a live show there? If we did a live show and broadcast back to the people, is it something that you think we can capture and bring to them? Is it something?
I actually think that we could because there were a lot of people, now museums have changed a lot today.
Right.
They're a lot more interactive, and especially fairly new exhibits, more interactive, so there's more conversation happening in museums. It used to be the case that if you went into a museum, you had to be so quiet. Right, like you
They're
could hardly
very
whisper,
interactive now.
but they're very active and they've got a lot of screens going, what have you. So I think we possibly could. I
Something
really
we'll
think
look
that we
into
could.
because we believe something that Reverend Sharpton says with his nationally syndicated radio show. He says that when he can, I take you on the road with me.
Yes.
And that's audio. But we're talking about visual, and since we social media and we have cameras now, we can broadcast live. So
Maybe
it's
we
something
should
that
go
we
down during the
look at,
Congressional Black Caucus. And
and do a broadcast from there.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot more
Hear that, Skip?
electronic publication in museums now.
Yeah, so that's something that we'll look into. I could Kelly,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add, since we're talking about visuals and we're talking about the question of black on black violence and self-hatred, and I want to, bring in the hip hop generation. There's a film that came out, a movie that came out, horror film. I think it was done by the Hudlin brothers, called Tales from the Hood. Oh. I mean, it is.
I think y'all may have
very
to revoke my
accessible.
black card. I don't know that one.
It's a horror film set in the black community, set in Compton, California,
period?
Los Angeles. It was done in the 80s, I think.
Well, it's more than-
it's a commercial film
Well-
by the Hudlin brothers, but it's brilliant in how it captures, the violence that's going on. It's a horror film, right? And it's kind of comical. Clarence Williams III is in it.
Is it? This seems like this is more than a. It's like a 3-part to this. It's not just that film. It's more in there.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because you
The
got the
different
drive.
chapters or
you got different
episodes.
chapters.
Oh,
You
yeah.
got the
And it's
one,
really, really well
the
done.
one that you're talking about is very interesting because they get these black folks who are gangbangers,
Right.
and they wind up in hell.
No, don't tell them.
Oh,
Don't tell them.
oh, God.
Don't be a
Okay.
spoiler.
You
Okay, all right, all right.
So where
But-
can I get it?
Oh,
You go online,
Oh,
yeah.
you go on
Netflix?
Yeah, go online. It's a, you know,
Yeah.
it's a, you know, it's a commercial, you know, mainstream film, very well done.
But it's not just
it's on-
separated
You go
by-
on Hulu, you can go on Netflix, or Tales from the Hood.
Yeah, but it's not just that. There's also, which caught me by surprise, and maybe I'm confusing this because I know that movie. But there's another piece, and maybe Spike Lee did this one, the one with the drive on the turnpike where the people got shot in the van. And that's why I'm saying this is all kind of part of it. There was a like a drive squad. It's a part series where there was black folks kidnapping black folks in the black community that were doing damage to the black community and trying to get them together. And then and Drive Squad, something like Drop Squad, that's what it's called, Drop Squad. And then there's another story that talks about the shooting that took place on the New Jersey Turnpike, which United African Movement, Reverend Sharpton, I think it was UAM. If it wasn't, then it was National Action Network. The time period. I give BCAP, the Black Cops Against Police Brutality out of New Jersey, because I've mentioned this before. They protected us because when we went to protest that shooting, I remember one of the young ladies got shot in that van. We shut down the turnpike. We went to protest. We wound up shutting down one side of it that caused us to shut down both sides. Unheard of, shutting down the turnpike. And BCAP was there to protect us against the state troopers because they tried to move on us to arrest us, but BCAP wouldn't allow that, you know, and they were off-duty police officers carrying. So they made sure that they protected us and no one got arrested. And the governor was called, everything, you know, Reverend Sharpton was there, and, you know, we sent out the message, you know, that things had to change dealing with how the state troopers.
Right.
And I guess when, and I'll let Nilla tell her own story if she chooses to tell it, but there's still things going on, you know, on the turnpike.
Akira,
Driving while black.
Of course, that's
Akira,
right.
Why don't you share with the audience? I mean, you're a filmmaker. You've won some major awards. Tell them a little bit about the one that stands out and the themes on that.
Of, you mean of work that I've done?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I did a documentary on rap music, Rhapsody, back in 1990. It won an Emmy for Best Direction when I was with KQED, public television in San Francisco. And I've done work on political issues. I did a documentary around violence in the Oakland area. Religious questions.
Hitting some of the same themes.
Hitting some of the same feet. I did an interview with a neo-Nazi in California, and that was part of it. You know, I did issues around drugs and
Tremendous.
But you know,
Would you let us?
You have a website?
Would you let us run some of those?
Yeah.
Those videos if we can.
oh sure, I'd be honored.
That
I'd be
would be
honored.
tremendous.
I was in Zimbabwe. I did a documentary when I was with Christian Science Monitor, interviewing. This is '89 when interviewed Robert Mugabe, former president of Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Well, my point was this: that a lot of your documentaries hit upon the same themes that we're talking about today, and maybe Fatim can develop some time and an appropriate site for us to run those documentaries again
Well, the hip hop
for the
documentary.
benefit for our audience.
Yes.
Well, if we can't run it, maybe there's a way that Brother Kelly can
Sure.
direct people to be able to locate it. Remember, you can do that through social media now.
Right. Rhapsody used to be on YouTube. The last time I checked, it's not on there
Excellent.
anymore. But it hit on questions of black crime
Right.
and black violence in the lyrics and music. I mean, it's an expository look at the history of rap and the social commentary that a lot of hip hop music made. But I also want to give a shout out to a documentary I just saw last night that I did not do but was brilliant. It's on the history of the Blue Note record label, which is a classic jazz label. And this documentary shows the history of Blue Note and the kind of artists and music that it celebrated all the way to hip hop and the influence that jazz had on the hip hop generation and hip hop artists. It's a brilliant documentary. It's called Blue Note. And I saw it last night on Stars. Stars.
I'm gonna check
channel.
that out. And one of the things,
Absolutely brilliant. And I want young people to see that documentary, and they need to look at anything and everything that has to do with jazz, whether it's the jazz series that Ken Burns did for public television. I mean, it was black music, whether it was jazz or R&B and hip hop, early hip hop, and some present day hip hop that spoke to and reflected the aspirations of the African American experience.
I was going to piggyback off of that. Let me just piggyback off of that because we got to move on. Let me piggyback off of that. That you look at the context of when you talk about the label Blue Note out, you talk about the context of having radio stations that supported it.
Yes.
You had it.
Where are black radio
nightclubs
stations
and performance halls that these artists could go to at that
Yes.
particular time.
Yes.
So you look at that in the proper context and batons being passed on.
Yes.
Right.
Seeing from one group
Yes.
playing with another group. You're talking about
Yes.
if there was a hip hop concert and a jazz artist went there,
Yes.
that hip hop artist knew about that jazz artist that would
Yes.
call that jazz artist up there,
Yes.
and then they could
Yes.
rap, and it would blow the hip hop mind
Yes.
because there was the correlation and a relationship between
Exactly.
music.
Yes.
It
Yes.
wasn't just something that
Yes.
was just separated like that.
Check this out for Team Achille.
Yes, sir.
Who is your uncle?
James Moody.
Right, jazz. Yeah.
Right.
Great jazz artist.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, a revolutionary jazz artist.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. But who have we had here? Who was the godfather here? Bob Slade,
Yes,
right? Mtume.
yes.
I mean, this station, this program, OpenLine, has a rich legacy
Yes. Oh, yes.
that harkens to both our artistic and
Yes.
intellectual genius.
Yes, that's true. That's why I say that, and the archives of Soul Beginnings is something that can go on and live on for such a long period of time, and it just doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to die if it's not put on the radio. It could live in other platforms, and that's all I'm gonna say there. A couple of more stories I want to hit real quick. The president this week got a taste of his own medicine when he went to El Paso, and he went to also Dayton, where some folks chanted, "Send him back, send him back, send him back." And it's amazing that he goes there to El Paso, talk about healing, but then as he comes out of there, he starts tweeting about the Democrats and this venom.
And at the very same time, ICE raids
Yes.
take place where Latino men and women, fathers and mothers, are taken out of. It was a packing house.
It was packing house. It was the first day of school.
First
600.
day packing.
First day of school in was this Mississippi?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mississippi.
Outside of
600.
Jackson.
Yes, 680
3 different sites. Yep.
folks, workers arrested in record-setting immigration sweep on the first day of school.
These people are evil.
Evil.
These people who run our government now are evil. They have no souls.
Yeah.
Period.
And Eitan Edwards, when he was here, of the preparedness network. He talked about this, and one of the things that they stop as soon as you mention it, and is when you read about Nazi Germany, you get to understand. If you don't read these things, somebody put on your social media something that Bob Slade said, and we've all said it, that history doesn't repeat itself. People repeat history. That's something that we've all lived by
Interesting.
on these shows.
That's a good line. Say that again. History
it
doesn't repeat itself. People repeat history.
history.
That's powerful.
And the reason why I bring that up, because I just watched something as we were just mentioning about the undocumented workers. I'm watching how President Trump is moving. And if you don't know the history of other places and other dictators, then you won't understand what's happening. Just this week, he had
fascism is on the
Yes,
rise.
Oh, indeed.
Yes, and you've been saying that. You've been saying that for the longest. The top intel official was interrupted in a meeting and was urged to resign.
Right.
And it goes on to state in the story, Sue Gordon, she is the country's #2 intelligence officer, was asked to resign by Coates during a meeting.
No, I
And
don't think it was by Coates.
It wasn't Coates?
No, Coates resigned, and then
outgoing, it became more urgent on Thursday after her boss, outgoing spy chief Dan Coates, interrupted a meeting she was holding on election security and asked his deputy to submit her letter of resignation. The circumstances surrounding Gordon's resignation, including the role Coates appeared to have played in the timing of her announcement, seem to indicate she was forced out for political reasons. She states in the letter, "I offer this letter as an act of respect and patriotism, not preference. You should have your team," she wrote in a handwritten note to the president, and that was released by the White House. So, yes, you see the president, yes, he can have his team, but the way he's going about picking his team and how he's putting these pawns in place.
How many? I guess we can Google this, but I'm curious how many of his original cabinet members.
He's lost 31.
31.
31.
And is that a record?
Yes, that's a record.
Maybe compared
More
to
than
de
any
Blasio's record,
in
right?
the given period of time, in 2 years.
That's insane.
So
He's only halfway through his
was that
administration.
your question, or was your question, is there any cabinet member from
Still
the
remaining.
initial time he was taking office still there?
Steve Miller.
And Mitch McConnell's wife,
Jared
right?
Kushner.
Right.
And McConnell's wife.
Well, yes, Chow.
And our good friend Carson.
Right. Ben Carson.
Our
Guys-
dear brother Carson.
Guys, Trump is very dangerous. The closer we get to 220, he's going to seek to divide us even more than we are divided right now.
2020, not 220.
He's
We're going
trying-
back, baby.
Bottom line, what
No,
we all
2020.
need to be watching for is
2020.
he's trying to find himself a war,
Yeah.
right? And in part because
We
America's
found one right here in America.
right. But what I'm saying is, but like a real war, because America's history,
Iran.
right?
Iran.
And America's
Iran.
history
Iran.
shows that we do not
Right.
change presidents
Right. Right.
in the middle of a
Right.
war.
He's trying to
He's trying to get a war going.
not alone. He's accompanied by Israel.
Yep.
Right.
Israel sees Iran as an existential threat. It's probably one of the few Arab nation states that's still like functioning intact. But we have to be on guard. We have to do everything because Trump talks out of two sides of his mouth. On the one side, he'll say he doesn't want any wars, particularly regime change wars. That's one of the themes he ran against Hillary Clinton on. He was against these regime change. Meanwhile, he engages in regime
Right.
change. You know,
That's
the
right.
Native Americans say, you talk with a forked tongue. You know, you say one thing and you do another. So Iran is a potential war. They want to overthrow Venezuela. That's another potential war. So I think you're right, Jennifer, as when we come into, as Bob said, 2020, that the what is this, the phrase, the tail will wag the dog? You know, the tail will wag the dog. But the people have to come out. The people have to state their opposition to these things. We don't want any more wars.
You put out a very interesting. I looked at the date. I start to look at dates now when I read articles, but I forgot what magazine it was. But I saw it yesterday. I don't know if it recirculated or if you put it out yesterday. But it was talking about how Hillary Clinton lost the election, and it talked about it wasn't that Trump that energized a certain base. It was Hillary Clinton not energizing the Democrats to come out and vote, and that's why this is so important. And Jennifer, you talked about electability when it comes down to these candidates, which segues me into the next story. That there was a new poll just released this past Tuesday after the second round of debates, and former Vice President Joe Biden has 32% support, trailed by Elizabeth Warren with 21%. Bernie Sanders has 14%. Kamala Harris has dropped down with 7%. It moves on to state that Pete Buttigieg registers at 5%, and Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke have 2%. So this is, we're still far away.
I think an important question to ask all of these candidates, piggybacking on our last conversation, is to ask them their position on Israel, given Israel's complicity with the Trump administration and the potentiality of war. What is the position of these candidates on the United States' relation with Israel, particularly in light of its relationship? Well, we need to ask all of them openly, because
the answer is going to be very simple. Because most of those politicians are afraid of Israel and Israel's reaction and impact on their potential election. Israel, I mean, they have a great deal of behind-the-scenes power and authority, unfortunately.
And it's amazing that it's amazing, and this is a story that came out. It's amazing that we haven't heard them speak about Israel, but it's amazing we don't have a slip of the tongue when it comes down to that. We had a little slip of the tongue. Well, as Joe Biden states this past week, he made a statement. He stated, poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Former Vice President Joe Biden told a crowd in Iowa Thursday that he made that statement, and then he came back and tried to clean it up real quick. We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids, said Biden. But then he paused, then quickly clarified, wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it. But think how we think about it.
So can I connect? So I was driving, and my sister called me up and said that he'd said that, and so I need some help because I didn't Google it, but I'm trying, and don't beat me up, guys. I'm trying to understand what is wrong with what he said.
It's implicit that all poor kids are brown or black.
Wait, say it again then?
No, I clearly saw it as a gaffe. He meant to say that poor black kids are as bright as any other kid.
But he said poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. He put white kids as the bar.
Right.
Yeah, he put them on the pedestal.
Right.
Okay.
If
So
you read
here's
what it
here's the
says.
deal. I guess the reason that I
I don't think that's what he meant, but it came off
right. But I
very
guess
awkwardly.
the reason
But I don't
why
think only half
it
what he
didn't
said.
grab me or grip me in a negative way is because that's what we confront on a daily basis in America's school system and in our impoverished communities. We act as though white kids are superior in terms of their abilities than poor kids. And in America, where
But
your
there are
zip
poor
code,
white kids too.
right? But what I'm saying is, but in the main, when they put up pictures, I guess what I'm saying is, as somebody who does poverty work, when we talk about the welfare mom, they don't put up a picture
Right.
White?
of a white woman,
Right.
although
The stereotype is that to be poor is to
right
be a
when we
person of
talk
color.
about poverty in America, and when we try
Right.
to, and when we talk about who
Right.
can be educated and who cannot,
Right.
or who is smart and
Right.
who's not, we pit
Right.
poor people against white as the
Right.
standard. And so my point
Right.
is, right? I see the gaffe now. I understand what you all are saying.
Right.
It didn't grip me that way because that's the fight we fight every day, trying to help people understand that in America, if you are white,
Yeah. But
you have a greater chance of succeeding at every turn, regardless of educational status or not.
Because you are
Right.
white.
If you are poor, the odds are stacked against you.
Right.
And if you are
Right.
poor and black
Right.
or brown, the odds. But in America, we have an image of poverty as being black. So I
But-
think that I
but-
immediately went
But the more
into that.
immediate, but the more
I
immediate
got it.
question is a behavior of Biden, of gaffe after gaffe, and the direct question is, how is he going to hold up
Yes.
under the withering attack of Trump?
Yes.
Another gaffe he had, and I want to say this so that everybody's clear. For full disclosure, I support Bernie Sanders. However, I will support whoever the candidate is that comes out of the Democratic convention. But, you know, you got to take, because I support the Democrats does not mean I turn off my critical faculties. This problem of gaffe after gaffe is going to hurt Biden, especially when he comes under the withering attack, if he in fact becomes a nominee. And there's a big question, because his numbers are going down.
They're not going down that dramatically.
Well,
No, they're not.
it depends what poll you read. Now, Fatim cited a poll that showed him at 32%. I saw a Quinnipiac poll.
That's the
that
poll,
had-
I'm just-
right. Well, I saw another one that had him at 22%.
I haven't
They
seen
still
that.
have him leading, even when it's 22.
The lowest
But
I've seen is 20.
He said about Parkland today. He said yesterday when he was in Iowa. He said, yes, when the Parkland kids came to me when I was vice president, he was not vice president when the Parkland shooting happened. And we saw this in the debate.
And
This
Republicans
is
will
going
eat
to be.
that, and Trump will eat that up.
I raised the question some time ago,
And we can't make believe that it's not happening. Our hearts want us to make believe that this is not, but it's happening.
I raised the question a few weeks ago about Biden's age in relation to his mental faculty. I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of eyes, rolling eyes, but I'm concerned whether he is up to the task.
So if not him, then who? And I'm not saying that I'm for Biden, right? I'm just saying, if not him, then who? Because Bernie Sanders will likely run into the same concerns that people will raise.
No,
that
Bernie
is
Sanders
clear,
is not making
clear.
these
He's not
gaffes.
making these
No,
gaffes,
no.
and
I'm saying when people start talking about age.
I'm not talking about age.
I didn't say anything about Biden.
But let me let
Let me speak what I said. I didn't say about anything about
I
age.
understand. No, I
I said about
understand you're
his
talking about,
issues of
and
dementia.
Bernie's been making these
Right.
gaffes for years, right? But what I'm
No, that's not true.
Oh, no,
Don't
Bernie
say
has said
things.
gaffes.
Don't say
he
things.
would say
Bernie
things
has
all the
made
time
Bernie-
under Obama.
I know. I'm not
He
going.
did
I'm not
all
going to
the
let. I'm not
time.
going to let this be deflected. Let us talk.
I'm not trying
let
to
us,
deflect.
Let,
Why
let
can't
us
you
talk
let me?
about.
No,
let
why
us
can't
talk
you let me
about.
explain myself without trying to shut me down?
Go ahead.
Try not to shut me down and let me explain myself.
Go ahead.
Bernie has been making political gaffes for a very long time. Now, I'm not saying that they are not being, that they're not aggravated or exacerbated now.
Give us an
But,
example.
Under Obama, he made gaffes. When he went out
Give
there.
us an example
Okay, you know what?
of a gaffe.
Okay, you know what? I'll bring them back to you next week.
But you
No, I
can't.
can bring them back, but the reason why I can't is because I don't really hold on to that, because I look at more of what the person does and what they stand for. I don't really play into that. I hear you on. Why don't you just let me finish without shaking your head? I hear you.
Wait a minute, I can shake my
No,
head while
okay,
you talk,
because
right?
because you're dismissing me, and I'd rather you look at me and hear what I'm trying to say. That's what I would appreciate.
But
Bernie Sanders has been making gaffes. He made them under Obama. Obama had to come back.
That's an assertion
Let me
that you
please
can't. That you
finish.
can't.
Never
but
mind.
let
You
us
know what? I'm gonna
substantiate.
leave
Let
it
her-
alone.
Wait a minute. If we're
I'm
gonna
just
if
gonna
we're
leave
gonna
it
make
alone.
an accusation,
Right, but let him finish the-
substantiate
And I
it.
said that I can come back, but you didn't want to listen to me. I told you that I don't hold on to every gaffe because I look more at what the person does and what the person stands for, just as Barack Obama did. But there were numerous instances during the Obama administration where Bernie said things and people would say, "Oh, there he goes again." You can shake your head all you want, and you know what? I'll come back with it, and maybe in this moment I'll sit here and I'll Google. The point that I'm really making is that people are focused more on Bernie's on
Biden.
Biden's age and concerns. Well, I'm telling you what I'm hearing, right, and what you see in the papers, and people saying if he goes forward, maybe he should serve just one term. And so you may be talking about gaffes, but I'm talking about age, and I'm not trying to deflect. I think you can hold two conversations and two truths at one time.
May
Well,
I respond?
Yeah, go ahead,
I just have a
go ahead,
question.
let him respond.
No, if we're going to make an accusation,
Well, I'll sit here and I'll
give
do
an
the work.
example. Now, the accusation, the gaffe that I just spoke of, was something that Biden actually said. It's not something that I made up. You know, he talked about the Parkland shooting during the debate. We saw these gaffes when he was debating Cory Booker and he called him the future president. You know, I'm just saying, I'm not saying this. I just said I will support Biden if Biden is the Democratic nominee.
All due respect, why are you looking at me like I'm?
No, I'm
kidding.
right.
I'm kidding.
I will support Biden if Biden is the Democratic nominee. But I'm being objective here to say that if you're running for president and you have a tendency that shows itself again and again and again, it will become a perceived weakness as a candidate.
That's
That's all.
fair.
And I didn't say he's too old. I didn't say anybody was too old. I'm saying that you got.
You didn't say that, but
My issue around age was not in and of itself, not age in and of itself. His age in relation to issues around dementia, Alzheimer's. I don't know his medical record. I don't know his medical history. And let me also say, Biden has a history, even as senator, he has a history of making verbal gaffes. So
That is okay.
wait, I haven't finished. Now, just a point of question in terms of clarity, because Jennifer, you said Bernie Sanders made, quote unquote, I heard you, political gaffes. Now, are you distinguishing political gaffes from verbal gaffes?
No, I was not making any distinction, but I was
Because
just. But there are. Okay. It was so.
There is a difference between making political gaffes.
I was not making a distinction.
But that's important,
Right.
Because I
And he's
think
done
you're
both.
suggesting that Bernie Sanders has never made verbal gaffes.
Right.
Now, when people,
No.
now if people,
mental.
He's
of a
done
mental-
both.
right,
He's
right.
actually done
because
both.
a political gaffe may be simply someone disagreeing with Bernie Sanders calling for universal health care. Oh, there goes Bernie again, over and over again.
Right.
And if that's the case, that people are making...
Gaff is making a statement that you basically...
but she said 5 minutes ago, political gaffe.
I don't remember.
heard
I
that.
never said the word political gaffe.
No, I heard it.
No, I didn't say.
I
We can
heard
go back and look at the
No,
record. I didn't
let's
say.
do that. No, you
Okay,
said
but more
political
importantly,
gaffe.
but let me
Jennifer,
just.
you did
So
say it.
if you Google,
And
if
I'm
you
a
Google
journalist, so I
Biden,
listen
okay,
to
we'll
what
go
people
back and
say.
take a look at the
Okay.
record. But if you look at,
Okay.
if you Google There are several articles on Biden being a quote gaffe machine, a history of Joe Biden's biggest blunders that are both political and verbal. If you want to make a distinguish between the two, The Living and the Dead in 2010 at a St. Patrick's Day reception for Brian Cohen. Biden got confused over which of then Irish Prime Minister's parents had passed away. His mom lived in Long Island for 10 years or so. God rest his soul, he said, before catching his mistake. Although your mom's still alive. Stand Up for America at a campaign stop in Missouri in 2008. Then presidential nominee Biden exhorted State Senator Chuck Graham to stand up for a round of applause. Graham is a paraplegic after a car accident he had at age 16. Stand up, Chuck. Let them see you, Biden said. Another political gaffe. Okay. In the midst of his...
Wait,
You're
but
saying
just
Biden,
say
not
how-
Bernie.
but-
Not
Biden.
Bernie.
I'm
But
saying
you-
Biden. The
but you
point is
made
he
the
was saying that
argument
Biden has never had gaffes, and that's
No,
what
he said
Oh,
Bernie.
he
He
said
said
Bernie.
Bernie, not Biden.
He
Bernie.
said Bernie.
I was talking about Biden, saying Biden has always made gaffes. That's
We
what I
both
said.
agree.
No, he was saying Bernie.
He was talking about
Okay,
Bernie
well, I was saying
Sanders.
Biden.
No,
I
he said
said
Bernie.
Biden. I never said Bernie.
Okay.
I was not
think
talking
you said.
about. Then
Let's
I
go
made a
back.
mistake. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
this is the
We're
last-
good.
Jennifer,
Wait.
it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
It's
not
okay,
when
Bert.
I'm not allowed to talk.
Yeah. Let me
Well,
just
I never said
let me just
Jennifer,
read.
No one,
It's not okay when I shut down.
Let me
Look
say
at that.
this.
I never told you.
Let
you
me
couldn't
just
speak.
say this. Let me read this here.
I respectfully
So I was
asked you a
speaking
question.
about Biden.
Yeah, let me just read some of these
I
comments
said
here.
Biden has always made. I did not say Bernie.
Well, we don't have a
disagreement.
disagreement with that. We agree.
Wait. We're not going. Cut. Cut. Because this is interesting. Plum J stated, lawyer is interesting. Anthony Long says, okay, you guys, let's do it one at a time. DB4A said, let the lady talk. Lawyer is pissed, pay attention. Larry, we all know you're a Sanders fan, but I agree with Jennifer. Stop bringing disrespect for Larry. I'm reading each one, not skipping none. Go get him, sister. State your opinion. Bernie has two heads. Shaking my head. Allow the lady to get the point across. I agree with Jennifer. I let her finish. I love a woman with a little fire. They both are old. Sanders is too old. We the people want to hear what she has to say. That's not fair, Larry. Without Obama's endorsement, Biden will have no traction. Achille is right. Referencing age and Biden. Bernie, a different thing altogether. By the way, what is it with black women and their Bernie hate? I'm not going to say that part. Age has nada to do with policy change. One thing I'm not going to do is to have insults on here. So it's interesting that this woke up a few people here. But one of the things that being here is that we there's going to be a moment of disagreement, and I understand that, but we to have the courtesy. I'm not going to allowing everybody to finish what they have to say here and try to do it with respect here. So that's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm like, that's all. Big.
And I
thing
think
here.
we can have rigorous discussion.
Yes, and we need
without
to.
the presumption that we're being disrespectful.
Right. I'm just reading what the folks.
Oh, no.
what
I understand.
folks
I
are saying.
understand.
But there was
Totally.
something in the news, and I'm told that the screen is frozen. I wanted to put up a picture and look who's it's frozen on.
That was the reason for my laughing.
This next story that I'm going to say here as we get ready to close out is that there was a picture of two mounted Galveston police officers
Oh, please.
walking with a black man clipped with a rope, handcuffed, walking down the street. And it prompted comparisons to slavery. I mean, you bring this up week after week about the disrespect. I remember when James Byrd got dragged to death. And we brought on, at that time, the late Khalid Muhammad on OpenLine. And this guy named Budline went after our advertisers. And I'm not going to name some names, but some people went on there and was trying to defend we were equal opportunity people and we do. No, this man was dragged to death. Don't matter who we bring on. At the end of the day, that was going to take a stand for us as a people. that went down there to take a stand to say, you dragged a man to death. He died basically with his arm, his head, his body parts falling off.
Well, if we remember, Michael Ferguson was left to die for and to
Michael Brown.
Michael Brown. I'm sorry.
In Ferguson.
In Ferguson. Thank you. Thank you.
That's fine.
Gaff.
That's no gaff.
A little verbal.
Is that
gaff.
political or is that not?
Yeah. It's
But
verbal.
no.
Verbal.
A big gap.
Right. Left out in the street for 4 hours.
It's horrific.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter. They should.
This is why this is important, and no matter what and how it gets heated, the big thing is we as a people are always fighting battles. We are always fighting battles, and the good thing is that we have a platform where we can agree and disagree. But there's a lot of work that needs to get done out here, and there's a lot of us that are in different positions that can make a difference. So those are out there that are listening, that agree and disagree. And I'm hearing that he's trying to show the picture to everybody out there of this.
Which is why programs like our show is so
And
important
Gary
to the
Bird
community.
show,
Right.
Other folks show.
Right, it's so important to the community because we give you information, or at least we try to give you information, so that you can make intelligent and viable decisions.
Exactly. You agree or disagree at the end of the day. Well, I want to end on one positive note, and the sports brothers are not here, but being in New York City, it's hard not to be a baseball fan right now with the New York Mets because they are doing something. First of all, let me finish with the New York Mets. They have come back from the dead, and they are a half a game out of the wild card standings. There is about another month, almost 2 months to go in the baseball season, so anything can happen. But right now, the New York Mets are playing exciting baseball. When they have made this run, they won 15 out of their last 16 games. A lot of people said they were beating up on teams that had under 500 records. Well, the Washington Nationals came into town, and they have a winning record, and they so far beat them 2 out of 2, and the third game is this afternoon where last year former Cy Young Award winner Jacob deGrom is on the mound for the New York Mets. So it's just some exciting baseball. And across the river in the Bronx, the Yankees are putting up win after win after win, and they have a phenomenal record. So we don't know where this is headed, but we may be headed to playoff ball and possibly another Subway Series. And I remember.
Are there any Subway Series scheduled for this year?
Well, they played each other already. They played each other, but for the World Series,
You think
for
we
a
could have
Subway.
Subway Series?
Yes, and the last Subway Series, the Yankees won, I believe, 4-1. That was in the year 2000.
Have we ever had a
Sub,
World
sub,
Series?
yeah, a Subway Series, yes, yeah,
Subway
2000,
Series, World Series?
2000.
Wow, I don't
2000. I was there on the field. I was on the field when the Yankees won that. I covered at that particular time. I was covering for Kiss FM, and with both of the teams here, I'm getting ready to put in my credentials. I'm the baseball guy here for the station, so I'm putting my credentials, and we'll see where that goes. But I just wanted to update those folks that are sports fans. But I just want to thank everybody here. Is there anybody doing anything this week, anything that needs to be mentioned that you're part of, taking place? Any marches, anything coming up? Nothing? Okay.
I think we had a good show today. It was a rigorous discussion and a good discussion.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And we'll be back next week. We want to thank you for listening, your opinion. We agree or disagree with us at the end of the day, long as there's no disrespect out there and you folks chimed in, and we thank you for your support. You've been listening to OpenLine Online. We will be back next week. God bless.
God bless.
All right, let's go, Bob.